So just to understand a web stack perspective, there are different layers of Web3 tech stack. But if you talk about a Web2 tech stack, where we have clients, your browser, your server, and then the data goes to the server. And on the server, you also have a backup server, and there is a disaster recovery server, and all of this data is being managed by some DB. So your front end could be on the Web2 stack. Your front end could be, let's say, a full stack application with a React application, making some API calls on Node.js, and interacting with any of your database like SQL database or NoSQL database like MongoDB, and then extracting data, showing your analytics, learning on this data, all that stuff. That's Web2 stack, where you have database interfacing your front end full stack application, right? So in this case, when we come to Web3 stack, we say that we have different layers of the tech stack, where we say L0 is a network layer, where we talk about the most prominent network layer at L0 is Polkadot, where again we will come over and see how this thing is, how Polkadot works. And I think we also have a prominent speaker, Deepak Chaudhary, talking about it later. But to give an example, where layer 0 provides the networking capabilities for different networks. It's a chain of chains. So you basically have an interoperable layer which talks to different networks across different networks, right? So, and then you have layer 1 and 2, which is the protocol layer, where we currently have like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and whatever I'm talking about in terms of React.js, Node.js, Solidity language or Rust language. Please understand, Bitcoin was the first application of blockchain, and it was coded in C++. So it doesn't have to be like you have to understand all of these languages. You can still build on top of these applications. You can build on, as I think Praveen sir was talking about open source, and we're referencing inheriting existing stuff and then building on top of it. I think there is a lot of stuff which can be started from scratch if people do not understand technology, if people do not understand writing fresh code from start. So it's as good as you're writing a hello world application with a public static void main function on Java. So layer 1 and layer 2, we talk about the underlying blockchain architecture, where we have Bitcoin, Ethereum, IPFS. I'll take an example of Ethereum, where you can also write these smart contracts, and you basically say, this is a function of my smart contract, and people, and this is deployed on the network. The moment anyone interacts with the smart contract, that's when the transaction is created and you are locked into it. We'll have a demo of it. Then we have an L3 layer. L3 layer is a layer of human readable languages, where we basically have a development layer. We talk about Solidity language, and I'll show you how Solidity is written here. We have Rust. I think we'll again come to Rust when we talk about Polkadot and Substrate framework, and we also have the Web3.js. We also have an L4 layer, where it's basically a user interface layer where you interact with the network. So for example, you have tools like MetaMask and Rainbow and TapRadar, where the most prominently widely used currently is MetaMask, where you interact with your application. So if you have to build an application, or you're already building an application which you want to say that I want to interact with the blockchain and post this transaction on Ethereum or anything, then one simple way is interface with your MetaMask, configure your MetaMask to the right network, and post a transaction, which we will see. But understanding the tech stack is very important, where you as a developer, you can be a network layer developer, you can also be a protocol, you can also be a front-end developer, you can also be a back-end developer, where you are writing, reading the network for so many transactions in, let's say, Node.js, and then writing scripts to execute more transactions, which can also be done, by the way. So it's absolutely fine if you do not understand programming languages, but just understanding why is always the first question. I always keep saying this, that why is always the first question, right? And then what, and then you have how, who, when, and all those things follow. But please understand, the tech stack is very, very important. And I'll go to the next slide, where I have a lot of sections. So if you look at this where you have the protocols, infrastructure, development tools, and then app enablement. So this app enablement, we talk about different dApps that are also available and how different apps can be created on top of the existing networks, right? So if you look at the protocols at the very bottom, we talk about the protocols, underlying protocols, where we have layer 0, 1, and 2. Layer 1, we basically have all of these applications which we talk about, like Avalanche, Solana, Bitcoin, Ethereum. And then we have layer 2s, where we have Polygon and ZK Sync and Arbitrum. If you look at these sections and you look at these companies, there's so many companies already focusing on one section of it. Now, whether you want to be part of something where, let's say I'm working on identity, right? Or let's say I want to work on node infrastructure, where we are working and integrating and interacting with the network. So for example, different categories here, we have node infrastructure, we have wallet and key management, where we talk about how a wallet has to be configured, how my current application, my web application, my Web2 application will be linked and interfacing to the network, right? So MetaMask, Coinbase wallets, and then you have identity, you have decentralized compute, where we have computation, how the computation will happen on the network. We have decentralized storages, we have oracles and interoperability. Now we have some developer tools where ideally to be a blockchain developer, again, I was saying that you can also start writing code from scratch, or you can also use so many available templates which are available to start creating the contract. There are tools where you can use predefined templates to, let's say, create an NFT or create a smart contract which will perform a certain set of actions, right? So developer tools, tooling utilized across different stages of the Web3 developer journey, right? So you basically start from building it, testing it, deploying it, and you also have a monitoring it, right? So when you build, obviously you are coding it in some format, whether you use a low code or a no code environment, or you also take some predefined templates. Then you test it, you deploy it. Then each network also has like different environments. Like in Web2, we have a dev, QA, and production. Here also, we also have different environments where you can do test. There are different test nets available and mainnet available, right? So when you say mainnet, it is production. When you say testnet, it's a test environment. And then you also have tools for monitoring it. There is one section missing in this, which is talking about auditing, right? So when there is a smart contract, a single line of code in the contract written here and there can actually lead to disasters. And we have also seen it in the industry where people face issues with code audits, right? There is memory leaks, there is issues with bridges, there is issues with swapping values, there is issues with so many things. So doing a very strong audit on the smart contract, or it's like a penetration testing on your current application, right? You do penetration testing, you do vulnerability assessments. All of these things will have to can also be taken up if people here are also interested in security and vulnerability testing, penetration testing, brute force attacks. All of these things can also be done, which I think we already have it here. We have secure and audit. So there are companies who still do that, and it is a very interesting space where we have a lot of development happening, and we need to make sure that there is very strong crypto audit or a smart contract audit as part of the process. So that's deployment and audit, and then there is monitoring of the network as to how many transactions happen, what is my limit. So for example, if you look at the consensus mechanisms for each of these blockchains, right? And new blockchain companies, they come up with a new consensus mechanism and say, my blockchain is supporting 10,000 transactions per second, right? So 10,000 transactions. I'll give you an example of how this works. The understanding works, right? So if you say that I have X number of transactions happening per second, so the calculation is that you have 86,400 transactions happening per day. and then you equate that to, it's a 1 TPS or 2 TPS, right? And if the network is capable to handle 10,000 transactions per second, you cannot say that I'll move Uber today or Ola today to complete blockchain, because it cannot handle those many transactions, right? There has to be a network which justifies my transactions adding to the blockchain. It has to justify my blocks creating and building my network. So not everything, as Praveen sir rightly mentioned, not everything goes on the chain, right? You have to identify what has to be stored on the blockchain. Very important, like you cannot say I'll post all of my images on blockchain, right? Nobody's going to tamper your image. Yes, if they want to tamper, they can tamper, but let's store the image on a decentralized storage, create a hash of it, and then store that hash on the chain. So there are different ways to manage security. There are different ways to manage data storage, and there are different ways to grow the network. So identifying what goes on the network, identifying what data is stored on the blockchain is very, very important, very, very critical. Just for any business use case, whether it is supply chain, manufacturing, business, any business utility creation, do not just right away jump into including blockchain into it. Identifying even new startups that are coming up, very important that people understand why blockchain, because that's the first question people will ask, investors will ask, why blockchain, right? So there has to be parts of business processes where you justify the usage of blockchain, store that information, or again, blockchain is not a database to store, but it has to have very, very meaningful information as to what is contributing to building the network, right? Again, if you say that I want to store this blockchain on the cloud and I want to create a 5-node network as a private blockchain, it's expensive, right? Any instances you create on your Google, GCP, or AWS, or even Azure, these instances are expensive. So when you build a network, again, you have to identify what blockchain, what consensus mechanism, how is it solving your problem, how will you manage your network, and then so that's again part of the layer 1, layer 2 solution. And then every blockchain will also have its explorer, which we will come to in a few seconds here. But the idea is to identify the right solution, identify the right implementation of blockchain, and use these tools, and even learn from these tools as to how they're doing it, right? And then if you are doing a startup and you want to identify a problem statement, implement the right solution, and then obviously compete with the competitors here.